Hey, what's up guys? This video is for section 0-3, which is operations with integers, but this is the second part of this section 0-3, and we are looking at multiplying and dividing integers. And just keep in mind, integers are not fractions, they're not decimals, but they are negative numbers, positive numbers, and it's including the 0. So I do have a couple rules that you guys can follow when you are multiplying or dividing integers. And the first thing I want to explain is when you guys multiply. Now, before, you guys in junior high, well, not junior high, but in elementary, you guys use a special symbol to multiply, which looks like an X. But in algebra, we don't use that X to multiply because we have a variable, and you guys will see variables later on, but we do have letters from the alphabet, variables that we use in algebra. So the way we know how to multiply is either when you have parentheses and there's nothing in between. So I want you guys to look at here. There's parentheses, -3 inside, -2 inside, but there's nothing in between the parentheses. By default, that is multiplication. So every time you guys see parentheses and nothing in between the numbers or the parentheses, you have to multiply. Another example is this one here. You guys have 5, nothing in between, and you have a 3. So this also means multiply. Another one that you guys might see is with the dots in the middle. So you can have 5 times 2. So that's another way you guys can also look at multiplication. And that's going to be 10. 5 times 2 is 10. But the main thing is, if you guys do not see anything in the middle, by default, it is multiplying. Now, division, well, you can have a fraction form. So this means division. The division line is in the middle. So -10 divided by -5. Or sometimes you might see the actual symbol you guys learn in elementary, which is a division sign. In algebra, we kind of stop using this symbol and we go straight to fractions, but once in a while you might see that symbol for division. Now, what are the actual rules to multiply and divide integers? So the first one, if the signs are the same when you multiply or divide, the answer will be positive. Do not get confused when you guys are adding or subtracting integers. The rules are different. This section, this video is about multiplication and division. So when the two numbers have the same sign, then the answer will be positive. So I give you guys some examples here. A -3 times a -2, nothing in between, so that's why you multiply, is +6. 3 times 2 is 6, positive. +5 times +3, that's +15. When you guys divide, notice in the fraction, we have a -10 on the top divided by a -5. Notice how many negatives we have on the fraction. We have 2 negatives. So every time you guys have pairs of negatives, it becomes positive. So pair means 2. Or even number of negatives. That's another way to look at it. So if you guys have 2 negatives, it becomes positive, which is +2. Sometimes you are multiplying more than 2 numbers. So if you guys have 4 negative numbers, that's a pair. That's actually even number, 4. So the answer will be positive. Or you can look at it this way, -14 divided by -2, negative, that's the same sign. So my answer is positive. 14 divided by 2 is 7. Now, the next rule, if the signs are different, then the answer will be negative. So, one more time, if you have numbers with parentheses and there's nothing in between, that means you are multiplying. So notice the numbers. This one is a -3. This one is a positive because it doesn't have a sign. It does not have a sign on the left side. So negative times positive, negative. They have different signs, so my answer is negative. And 3 times 4 is 12. Or 5 positive times -2. Look in the middle, nothing in between, so that means you're multiplying. A positive times a negative is a negative. 5 times 2 is 10, so -10. Same thing with division. Now notice what happens here. You have a negative on the top and a positive. The 9 is positive because there's no sign on the left side. So it's a +9. You only have one negative, so the answer is negative. Negative divided by a positive is negative. And when you guys have odd number of negatives, the answers will be negative, all right? So we have 1 negative, the answer is negative. If you guys are multiplying and you have 3 negative numbers, well, 3 is odd, so the answer will be negative. Those are little tips that you guys can use to find out what is your answer. Another example is positive 32 divided by negative 2. That's negative. Positive divided by negative is negative 16. So the rules are the same for multiplying or dividing, but you just have to remember what to do. So when they have the same sign, it's positive when you multiply or divide. If they have different signs, the answer will be negative. Now, one more time, I'm going to repeat myself here. If there is no sign between the terms, then you are multiplying. By default, you have to multiply. Sometimes you are going to have a plus in between the parentheses, the terms. So what that means, you add, not multiply, you add. Or sometimes you subtract, you have a minus. But if there's nothing, you will multiply. So after looking at the two rules, when you guys multiply or divide the integers, well, let's go ahead and try some examples, and you guys see those examples here on the screen. So let's start with number 1. Number 1, you guys have two parentheses, one with the negative 3 inside and the second one with the positive 4. So notice there's a negative 3 and this one's a positive. Let me just put the plus on the left side. You don't need it, but just to show you that we do have a positive. Look at the signs. One's a negative and one's a positive. In between the parentheses, there's nothing. So that means by default, you have to multiply. So first, let's look at the signs. Different signs, a negative and a positive. So that means my answer will be negative. When they have different signs and you multiply or divide, you guys will have a negative answer. And you just multiply the numbers. 3 times 4 is 12. But we do have a negative and 12. Negative 12 is my answer. Now here, one more time, in between, you don't have anything, the 7 in the parentheses, so you are multiplying by default. So now let's look at the signs. The 7 is positive. There's no sign on the left side, so we do have an invisible plus. I just have it there. And on the right side, you guys have a negative 3. If you guys look at the signs, one's a positive, one's a negative. Positive, negative, different signs. So my answer is negative. And 7 times 3 is 21. So negative 21. This is another way to look at multiplication. You guys have the number 9, dot in between. Now guys, this is not a decimal, it's just a multiplication sign that we use in algebra. Instead of the X that you guys use in elementary, it's just a dot. So 9 times negative 8. One more time, 9 is positive because there's an invisible plus. This one is negative. A positive times a negative. When you have different signs, it's negative. And 9 times 8 is 72. So my answer is negative 72 because the integers have different signs. 20 times 10, that's the next one. There's nothing in between, so that means I have to multiply. 20 is positive. 10 is positive. They have an invisible plus. Let me just put that so you can see it. Positive, positive. So when the numbers have the same sign, the answer is positive. Positive times a positive, same sign is positive. 10 times 20 is 200. Now this one is kind of like a mixed problem because you guys have the dot in between, but you also have parentheses. Now notice, we do have a dot, which means multiplication. You also have parentheses, which is multiplication. So you are going to multiply positive 10. This one's positive. There's nothing in front on the left side, so it's an invisible plus. Positive 10 times a negative, different signs. So when you multiply or divide and they have different signs, it will be negative. And 10 times 6, 60. So my answer will be negative 60. Now this one here, also, one more time, you guys have parentheses. The number is on the right side of the parentheses, which is fine. But look in the middle, there's nothing in between, so that means we have to multiply. This number is negative, so you guys have a negative 36 times, and this number is positive. there's nothing in front of the 9, so it's a positive 9. So negative 36 times a positive 9, they have different signs. So my answer will be negative, and when you multiply 36 times 9 is 324. So negative, because they have different signs, 324. All right, so this one. Notice that we have 4 different numbers. One is a negative. Well, actually, there's 3 different numbers, but these are the same number. But we do have 4 numbers that are multiplying to each other, even though these are the same. We have a negative 2 times, there's nothing in between, a negative 2 times a 3, there's nothing in between, times a negative 1. I want you guys to count how many negatives you guys will have. So we have 1, 2, 3 negatives. So that's an odd number. So when you multiply and you have odd number of negatives, that means your answer will be negative. So right then, guys, right away, we know we need a negative integer. But let's go ahead and multiply the numbers. Now, you always multiply from left to right. That's how you start, and you guys follow the actual order. So let's multiply the first 2 from left to right, the first 2 integers. So when you multiply these 2 right here, you do have a negative times a negative. They have the same sign. So it's going to be a positive 4. So let me write down positive 4 right here. And I'm going to bring down the 3 in parentheses, and I'm going to bring down the negative 1 in parentheses. Okay? Now I'm going to multiply the next first 2 numbers. So from left to right, those are the first 2 numbers. 4 times 3. 4 times 3 is 12. And I bring down the negative 1. And guess what, guys? We have to multiply 12 times negative 1. 12 is positive. 1 is negative. Different signs. Positive times negative. It's negative. And 12 times 1 is 12. So my answer is negative 12. And remember, we said the answer is negative because we do have odd number of negatives. 1, 2, 3. So it has to be a negative 12. Now this one here is to get you guys thinking about mathematics and how you guys can use number sense, okay? You have to understand the problem. Remember I showed you guys the problem solving plan where you guys have 4 steps. You really have to understand the problem, because if you understand the problem, it's going to make your life a lot easier. So let's look at what we have here. We have a negative 3 times a 5 times a 7 times a 12 times 0. Now, hold on. We do have a negative number here, so it's only one negative. So we think that the answer will be negative. But guys, you probably already saw it. We have a 0 at the end. So you're going to multiply from left to right, and then you multiply by the next number, and then you multiply by the next number. But eventually, you guys are going to multiply by 0. And anything multiplied by 0 will be, you got it, 0. So doesn't matter what we get. I'm not even going to try and multiply. But all of this right here, guys, except the 0, the negative 3, the 5, 7, and 12, is going to be some negative number, because we have one negative, so the answer has to be negative. But whatever that number is times 0, well, the answer will be 0. And keep in mind, 0 is not a negative number, it's not a positive number. We say it's neutral. We should say it's 0. So you cannot say negative 0, you guys cannot say positive 0. It's just 0. So even though you multiply by a negative, this stays as 0. So we got the answer. And that's one of the things that you guys can do. Use number sense. Same thing as common sense, but number sense. If you understand the numbers, if you understand the problem, it's going to make your life a lot easier. So now we are going to multiply fractions, and I'm going to make it as easy as I can, guys. But when you guys have fractions, one of the things that you can do when you multiply, you can simplify a few numbers or a couple of numbers. So let's go ahead and look at number 9 here. We want to multiply, and it says that's the instruction. You want to multiply, and you also have a dot in between. So negative 24 times 5 over 12. So one of the things that you can do is when you have fractions, you can cross simplify. So I do have a fraction, 5 over 12. Let me convert the negative 24 into a fraction, because when you multiply fractions, every number has to be a fraction. If you guys have decimals, then every number has to be a decimal in order to multiply. So you multiply apples with apples, oranges with oranges. So let me make this a fraction right here. You just put a 1 under the negative 24. If you guys look at the numbers across, and I'm looking at the negative 24 and the 12, well, you guys can simplify, okay? Now, this is where you guys have to think about the greatest common factor. So the number that goes into 24, and at the same time, it goes into 12. Now, you might say 2 goes into 24 and 12. Yeah, you're right. But there's a bigger number. You might say 6. Yeah, you're right. 6 goes into 24 and 12. But there's a bigger number than that. You might say 8. Wait a minute. 8 goes into 24, but 8 doesn't go into 12. So nope, that's not a common factor. 8 doesn't go into 12. It has to go into both numbers. The highest one is 12. 12 goes into 24, and 12 goes into 12. So you guys can simplify, cross simplify. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cross this one out, but I do have to keep the negative though, because it is a negative number. And I'm going to divide by 12. 24 divided by 12 is 2. And over here, 12 divided by 12 is 1. And that is the greatest common factor, is 12, right? So once you divide across by 12, you can now multiply the numbers. So when you multiply fractions, you multiply the top numerators. So negative 2 times 5. Keep in mind you have different signs. So that's going to be negative 10. And on the bottom, 1 times 1 is 1. Now in your answers, you don't need the 1 under the fraction. So if you guys have a 1 under, just erase it. So I'm going to say equals to negative 10. So that's my answer here. You guys multiply the fractions, cross simplify, and you got your answer. If you guys have a fraction and a couple of integers are negative 5 and negative 4. This is a rational number, it's a fraction. The easiest way is to first multiply the integers, okay? So these two parentheses, nothing is in between. So I can multiply the integers first. Let me bring down the fraction, 3 over 2. And I can do that, guys, because when you guys multiply, order doesn't matter. If you are multiplying numbers, you can multiply the first one and the last number, or you guys can multiply the first one and the second number first. So that order doesn't matter, but as long as you multiply. So I'm going to multiply those numbers. So negative 5 times negative 4. Negative times a negative is positive. They have different, not different, they have same sign. So this negative 5 times negative 4 is going to be negative 20. Right there, guys. Okay, now I'm using parentheses because that number comes from parentheses. They have negative 5 inside the parentheses and the negative 4. Let's make the negative 20 into a fraction. So put a 1 under. Now you guys cross simplify. I cannot cross simplify 3 and 1 because they don't have a common factor. But 2 and 20, they do have a common factor. And you can divide the 2 and the 20 by 2. So I'm going to divide. So let me cross this one out. Let me keep the negative. Always keep the negative if you have one. 20 divided by 2 is 10. And I'm going to divide this one by 2, which is 1. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So now you guys multiply the numerators right here, guys. So we have a negative 30. And you multiply 3 positive times negative. Positive times a negative, different signs, is negative. And on the bottom, 1 times 1 is 1. And you guys don't need that 1 on the bottom of the fraction. So just put negative 30 as your answer. Same idea on this one. Notice we have two integers, negative 3, negative 8, and we have a rational number, the fraction, 5 over 6. So order doesn't matter. I'm going to multiply the first two integers first. That's going to make my life a lot easier. So negative 3 times negative 8. negative times negative, they have the same sign. So that's going to be positive 24. 3 times 8 is positive 24. My fraction is 5 over 6. So let me bring down the fraction, 5 over 6. Let's make the 24 into a fraction so I can multiply fraction times fraction. I can cross simplify 24 and 6. The greatest common factor, the number that goes into 24 and 6, is 6. That's the greatest one. 2, yes, 2 goes into 24 and 6, but it's not the greatest. 3 goes into 24 and 6, but it's not the greatest common factor. 6 goes into 24 and 6 goes into 6. So I'm going to divide 24 divided by 6. So that's going to be 4. And 6 divided by 6 is 1. So let's go ahead and multiply the numbers on the top. The numerators, 4 times 5, that's 20. I'm multiplying because I don't have anything in between the parentheses. So that's going to be 20. And on the bottom, 1 times 1 is 1. So you guys divide. So my answer, we don't need that 1 on the bottom. Positive 20 right here. Now here, same thing. We have a negative 35 times a positive 3 over 7. So first, let's go ahead and make the 35 into a fraction. So I put a 1 under the fraction. I can cross simplify 35 and 7. I can divide the two numbers by 7. These ones don't simplify because the only common factor is 1, but you guys will get the same number if you divide by 1. So it stays the same, but I'm going to divide the negative 35 by 7 and 7 by 7. So I'm going to cross this one out here. I'm going to keep the negative, and 35 divided by 7 is 5, and 7 divided by 7 is 1. So when you guys multiply the numerators, negative 5 times 3, that's a positive. So negative times positive, they have different signs. That's going to be negative 15. And on the bottom, 1 times 1 is 1. Once again, I don't need that 1 on the bottom, so my answer is negative 15. So now, let's go ahead and practice how to divide integers. So, the rule is, remember, when you multiply or divide, the rules are the same. If you have the same sign, the answer will be positive. If you have different signs, then the answer will be negative. So, number 13. We have 8 divided, and notice the symbol that we use, divided by negative. So 8 is positive. I'm just going to put a plus right there. It's a positive 8. Divided by a negative 2. So 1 positive, 1 negative. Positive divided by negative. Different signs is negative. And 8 divided by 2 is 4. So my answer will be negative 4. You can also have a fraction. So this one here, negative 24 divided by a negative 6. Now here's where students get a little bit confused, okay? If you have even number of negatives, a negative and a negative, that's 2. You have 2 numbers, so 2 is even. If you guys have an even number of negatives, the answer will be positive because the two numbers, the numerator and denominator, they have the same sign. So my answer has to be positive. And when you guys divide 24 divided by 6, that's how you read the fraction. Negative 24 divided by negative 6 is going to be positive 4. A negative divided by negative, the same sign, is positive 4. If, one more time, you guys have a negative 6 divided by a negative 4, notice there's a negative here, a negative over here, same sign, you're dividing. So when you divide or multiply and you have the same sign, the answer will be positive. So 16 divided by 4 is 4. So my answer is positive because the two numbers, the two integers have the same sign. They're both negative. Negative divided by negative is positive. Now this one here, negative 12 divided by 3. Notice how many negatives we have in that fraction. There's only one negative on the top. Only one. So when you guys have odd number of negatives, one is odd, then the answer will be negative. One more time. The top number is negative, but the bottom number is positive, so you only have one negative. So a negative divided by a positive, they have different signs. Let me put the plus on the bottom. So you guys can see it. There's a plus here. So when you guys have different signs, the answer will be negative. Or you can also think about how many negatives you guys have. There's only one. So that's an odd number. 1 negative. 1 is odd. So my answer will be negative because they have different signs, and 12 divided by 3 is 4. So negative 4 is my answer. Sometimes you might see the negative on the bottom of the fraction, and that's totally fine. Not very common, but sometimes the negative is on the bottom. If you guys look at the numbers, the top number 16 is positive. It doesn't have a sign on the left side in front of it. So it is a positive. Let me put an invisible. Let me just write down here positive. So it is an invisible plus, positive 16. And the bottom is negative. One more time. Positive divided by negative, different signs, it's negative. And you guys can also look at it. There's only one negative. So my answer will be negative. And 16 divided by 4 is 4. So negative 4 is my answer. Now here, guys, look at the negative. Okay, you guys have a negative on the left side of the fraction, 18 over 6. Now let's talk about the negative first, okay? When the negative is right in the middle of the fraction, so notice here, a negative in the middle. You can't really see if it's on the top or the bottom, like the previous one that I showed you guys. And let me just show you guys that again, okay? So you guys can see. This one here, very, very clear, the negative's on the bottom. This one here, very, very clear, the negative's on the top. But if you guys have the negative in the middle, right in the middle of that fraction, here's what I want you guys to do. I want you guys to take that negative to the top number. Now, mathematically, you can also take it to the bottom, but only one number has a negative. There's only one negative, so only one number is negative. Do not, and I repeat, do not put a negative to the top number and the bottom number. Not both, only one. So when you guys change that negative to the top, it looks like this. You guys have a negative 18 on the top and a 6 on the bottom, okay? So when you guys look at the negatives, there's only one negative. So that means my answer has to be negatives because one is odd. Or another way to look at it, once you move the negative to the top, the bottom 6 becomes positive, okay? So negative divided by positive, they have different signs, it's negative. Look at the numbers, 18 and 6, you guys divide. So we have equals negative 3, because you guys have a negative divided by positive, different signs, so it's negative, and 18 divided by 6 is 3, negative 3. Now here, this one is a little bit tricky, and most of my students every year, they get it wrong because they think the answer is 6. It's not 6, guys, because when you look at the fraction, you want to simplify the fraction, all right? Now, first of all, let's look at the signs. We have a positive 6 divided by a positive 36. So 36, the bottom number, does not go into 6. You cannot divide 6 by 36. So you guys have to simplify the fraction. So when you simplify, the greatest common factor that goes into 6 and 36 is actually 6. So if you divide 6 by 6 and 36 by 6, look what happens. Here's the fraction line. On the top, 6 divided by 6 is 1. And on the bottom, 36 divided by 6 is 6. My answer is 1 over 6, not 6. Let me show you guys. 1 over 6 is not the same as 6. Because if you make 6 into a fraction, you have to put 1 on the bottom. But we don't have the 1 on the bottom. We have the 1 on the top. So my answer is not 6. Let me tell you guys when the answer is 6. If the fraction was backwards, 36 over 6, that's 6. Notice the 6 on the bottom, the 36 on the top. So this one, yeah, you can say the answer is 6. But this one here, 6 over 36, is 1/6. And it is positive because both numbers are positive. And Here, guys, you have a negative 7 over 14. The answer is not 2. It is not 2 because 14 doesn't go into 7. But we do have one negative. So remember, I told you guys you can take the negative to the top number right there, guys. So we have a negative 7 over 14. So my answer is going to be negative because there's only one negative in the fraction, odd number of negatives. Or you can say a negative divided by a positive number is negative. They have different signs. You can reduce the fraction. You can divide by 7 on the top, and you can also divide by 7 on the bottom. So when you guys divide, the top will be negative 1 because a positive 7 divided by negative 7 divided by 7 will be negative 1. And at the bottom, 14 divided by 7 is 2. So my answer will be negative 1 over 2. You guys don't have to make it into a decimal. You keep it as a fraction. And that is the answer. Alright guys, so this concludes my video on how to multiply and divide integers. Make sure you guys practice. And if you guys like my videos, go ahead and hit that like button. You can also subscribe to my channel. And I'll see you guys later.